I never thought the glow of a phone screen could change my life, but that's exactly how it began. On a quiet Sunday morning when the house smelled of coffee and the rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. My daughter Lily was sitting at the table, eyes glued to her laptop, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. There was a light in her face, a dreamy warmth that mothers recognize instantly, the look of someone falling in love. At first, I thought it was sweet. She had always been shy, the kind who hid behind books and never believed she'd find someone who understood her. When she told me she met someone online, I tried to sound open-minded. The world had changed, and love seemed to exist inside screens now, in glowing texts and virtual promises. But something inside me, a mother's instinct maybe, stirred uneasily. She said his name was Daniel, and the way she said it carried the kind of certainty that frightened me. In her voice I heard not just affection but surrender. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. Every morning, she woke up early to talk to him before work, her laughter echoing through the hall like it used to when she was a child. I wanted to be happy for her, but I noticed small changes. She stopped seeing her friends. She became secretive, and her eyes flickered with guilt when I asked simple questions. Then one afternoon she came home flushed with excitement and said she and Daniel had decided to get married. I thought I'd misheard. Married? They hadn't even met in person. She told me it was going to be an online ceremony, something new and romantic, like a digital elopement. I tried to reason with her, asked her to at least meet him first, but she said love didn't need geography, it just needed faith. I felt my heart tighten because I knew faith without truth could be a trap. On the day of the online wedding, she dressed in a white blouse, did her hair in soft curls, and set up her laptop in the living room. She stood there trembling, smiling at the camera as music played through the speakers. I watched in disbelief as she repeated vows to a man she'd never touched. When it ended, she hugged me, crying with happiness, saying she was finally someone's forever. I held her but felt only dread. A week later, Daniel convinced her to quit her job, saying he wanted her to start fresh, to prepare for their life together. She agreed without hesitation. That was the first real crack. The second came when she said he needed her help with some financial matters. He claimed his business had hit a rough patch, and because they were married now, he wanted to put a few things in her name temporarily, just for safety, he said. I tried to intervene, but she wouldn't listen. She said I was being controlling, that I never trusted her choices. It hurt, but I backed off, thinking she'd learn. Months passed, and the house started feeling emptier. Lily spent most of her time online, talking to him, laughing in that eerie, distant way that made me wonder if she was laughing at something real or imagined. Then one morning, I heard her sobbing in her room. She was shaking, staring at her laptop screen, whispering no over and over. I asked what happened, but she wouldn't tell me. Later that day, I found her phone on the counter. The messages were still open. What I read made my knees give out. Daniel wasn't who he said he was. He had another woman, someone he'd been promising the same future to. He wasn't even living in the same state he claimed. My daughter's world shattered that day. She locked herself in her room for hours, refusing to eat or speak. I tried to comfort her, but she stared through me like I was part of the lie. When she finally emerged, she said she needed to get away, that she was going to stay with Daniel to make things right, to hear his side. I begged her not to, but she left anyway. That was the last time I saw her smile. Days turned into weeks without a call. When I finally reached her, her voice was small and flat. She said she was fine, that Daniel had explained everything, that I should stop worrying. But a mother's heart knows when fine isn't fine. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to Lily. I opened it because my gut told me to. It was from a bank her house mortgage had been refinanced without her knowing. Her name was on new documents, and the cosigner was Daniel. My stomach turned cold. He had manipulated her into giving him control over her assets. The home she had inherited from her grandmother, the one she worked her whole life to maintain, was now tied to a man who existed behind a screen. I knew then that this wasn't just a love story gone wrong. It was a setup. I drove to the bank the next morning pretending to be calm, though inside I was burning with a rage I could barely contain. The manager explained that Daniel had convinced Lily to sign power of attorney papers digitally. He'd promised it was just a temporary arrangement until they could merge finances after the wedding was officially recognized. I stared at the documents, seeing my daughter's signature and realizing how easily trust can become a weapon. I went home shaking, my hands cold against the steering wheel, thinking of how to tell her without breaking her completely. But before I could, she came home late that night, looking different, older, drained, eyes swollen from tears. She said Daniel was coming to visit in person for the first time. She wanted me to meet him. The words hit me like ice. I asked when, and she said tomorrow. Tomorrow, the man who had taken everything from her would walk into my home. I barely slept that night. Every noise outside made me flinch. I replayed every warning sign I had ignored, every time I had stayed silent to keep peace. By morning, I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. When the doorbell rang, I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes before a storm. Daniel wasn't what I expected. He looked polished, confident, charming in that effortless way that fools people who haven't seen true deceit. He smiled at me like we were old friends and handed me flowers. I wanted to throw them in his face, but I didn't. I let him sit at my table, drink my coffee, and talk about love as if he hadn't just stolen my daughter's life. Lily sat beside him, hanging on his every word, desperate to believe the dream wasn't over. He talked about buying new property, about starting over, about building a future together. That was when I realized his next move. He was after the house. My house. The only thing left that wasn't already tied to his name. I smiled politely, played the naive mother, and told him I'd think about helping them. But the moment they left for a walk, I went straight to my office and called a lawyer friend. I asked how quickly a property could be sold if it was under my name alone. He said within days, if I moved fast. That night, Lily went out again with Daniel, and I started making plans. I told myself I wasn't just protecting a house, I was saving what was left of my daughter's dignity. I knew Daniel would destroy her completely if he got one more thing from us. For 2 days, I pretended everything was fine. I cooked dinner, laughed at his fake stories, even took photos when he asked. But behind that calm mask, I was closing deals. Quietly, I found a buyer who didn't ask questions and signed every paper that would make sure Daniel would have nothing left to take. On the third day, while they were out shopping for their future home, I finalized the sale. The house was gone, legally transferred. When Lily came back and I told her, she looked at me as if I'd stabbed her. She screamed, asking how I could betray her like that. Daniel pretended to comfort her, whispering poison about control and manipulation, making me the villain. But I could see the panic in his eyes. He realized his game was collapsing. The next morning, he was gone. No message, no call, just gone. Lily cried for days, saying I'd driven him away. It broke me, but I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the only weapon left. A week later, the police called. They had traced Daniel to several online scams, multiple identities, and a trail of broken women across different states. My daughter listened in stunned disbelief as they explained he'd been under investigation for months. Everything he'd told her was a lie. When the call ended, she didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at the empty space where her wedding ring used to be, and whispered that she finally understood why I sold the house. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. In that moment, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. But I also knew something inside her had changed forever. Love had left a scar, and no amount of truth could erase it. I didn't regret what I did. I saved her, even if she never thanked me for it. But deep down, I also knew this was only the beginning of our story, not the end. Because when someone like Daniel disappears, they always come back for what they think they own. And I was ready. For a few weeks, I thought it was finally over. The house was sold, Daniel was gone, and Lily was slowly starting to piece herself back together. She took a part-time job at a local cafe, started talking to her old friends again, and even smiled occasionally. I told myself that maybe time would do the rest, that scars would fade and memories would dull. But peace has a way of luring you into false safety. One evening, I came home from work and found a bouquet of white roses on the front porch. There was no note, just the faint smell of cologne I would never forget. My heart froze. I looked around, but the street was empty. I took the flowers inside and threw them straight into the trash. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the lights on and watched the shadows crawl across the ceiling, waiting for the next sign. It came sooner than I expected. The following morning, Lily's phone rang while she was in the shower. The caller ID said unknown, but I knew. I didn't answer, but when she came out, dripping wet and wrapped in a towel, she looked at the screen and went pale. She didn't have to say his name. I could see it in her eyes. She whispered that he just wanted to talk, to apologize, to explain everything. I told her to block him, but she didn't. That night she was gone. No note, no message, just gone. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I drove to every place I could think of, called every number I had, even went to the police, but they said she was an adult and could leave if she wanted. They didn't understand my daughter wasn't running away. She was being pulled back into a web she didn't even realize was closing around her. 2 days later, I got an email from an unknown address. It was from Daniel. He wrote that Lily was fine, that she was with him, and that I should stop interfering or things would get worse. He even attached a photo of my daughter sitting beside him in a hotel room, smiling, but her eyes were swollen and empty. My hands trembled as I stared at the image. He was mocking me, daring me to react. I realized then that Daniel hadn't just wanted money or a house. He wanted control. He wanted to break both of us completely. I refused to let him win. I called every contact I had, even a private investigator I once worked with during my years at the law firm. Within a day, I had an address, an old motel on the outskirts of the city. I drove there before dawn, parking far enough away so no one would notice me. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a dark SUV that looked familiar. I waited until I saw Daniel come out, wearing sunglasses and that same arrogant smirk that haunted me. He lit a cigarette and started talking on the phone, pacing near the car. My pulse roared in my ears. I knew I couldn't confront him yet, not without Lily, not without proof. I followed him when he drove off, keeping my distance. He stopped at a bank downtown, withdrew a large sum of cash, then met a woman near the park. She wasn't Lily. She was younger, dressed provocatively, laughing at everything he said. He was already working on his next target. My stomach turned. I took photos from my car, every angle I could, and then followed him back to the motel. By the time he went inside, my hands were steady. The fear was gone, replaced by something sharper purpose. I waited until night fell before making my move. The motel's flickering neon sign cast a dull red glow across the parking lot, and every sound seemed louder than usual, the hum of a vending machine, the distant bark of a dog, the buzz of a broken light. I walked quietly toward room 14, the one I had seen Daniel enter. Through the thin curtains, I saw movement, the shadow of two people, and then the unmistakable sound of my daughter's voice. She wasn't screaming or crying. She was pleading. I could hear the rhythm of desperation in her tone, the kind that only comes when someone is trapped between hope and fear. My fingers tightened around the phone in my pocket as I started recording audio. I needed evidence, not just anger. Slowly, I pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. The scene inside froze me for a moment. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, eyes red and face streaked with tears, while Daniel stood across the room, pacing and waving his hands like he was performing for an audience. When he turned and saw me, his expression didn't change. He smirked, that same infuriating smirk that made my blood run cold. He said something about boundaries and obsession, how mothers like me never learn to let go. But I didn't answer. I just stepped forward and told him it was over, that I knew everything, that the police would soon too. He laughed and said no one would believe me. He was right about one thing. I had no proof that could stand in court. But I had something better. As he spoke, I held up my phone and played back the recording I had just captured, his own voice threatening my daughter, his tone dripping with manipulation and menace. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Lily looked at me, realization dawning like sunlight breaking through a storm. She stood up, shaking, and stepped away from him. I told her to come to me, and when she did, Daniel lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. Instinct took over. I swung the nearest thing I could find, a heavy lamp hitting him hard enough to send him sprawling. He shouted, not in pain but in rage, promising that I'd regret this. I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her out of the room, running until we reached the car. My hands trembled as I started the engine, my heart pounding so fast it felt like it might break through my chest. Behind us, the motel door slammed open and Daniel came out screaming something I couldn't hear. Tires screeched as I drove away into the night. Lily sobbed quietly beside me, whispering that she was sorry, that she hadn't seen the truth until it was too late. I told her it wasn't her fault, that love makes even the strongest people blind. When we reached home, the weight of everything crashed down. We sat in silence, the kind that only comes after surviving something monstrous. The next morning, I took the recordings, the photos, and every document I had, and went straight to the authorities. This time they listened. Daniel was arrested 2 days later, caught trying to cross state lines with false IDs and stolen money. His face was on every local news channel, his charm stripped away and replaced by the truth, a predator exposed. When Lily watched the report, she didn't cry. She just whispered that justice finally had a voice. I thought that would be the end, but it wasn't. A week later, I got another letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single photo, our old house, the one I had sold, burned down to ashes. Scrawled on the back were 3 words, "You destroyed me." I realized then that revenge doesn't end when the villain falls. Sometimes it lingers in shadows, waiting, watching, feeding on what's left behind. But even so, I felt no fear. I had faced him once, and I could do it again if I had to. Because this time, I wasn't the same woman who waited helplessly by the window while her daughter cried. I was stronger, colder, and ready for anything. When Daniel was finally behind bars, I thought the silence that followed would bring peace. But silence can be louder than noise, especially when you know it's hiding something. Weeks passed, and the town moved on. People stopped whispering about the woman whose daughter got married online, stopped pitying us, stopped calling. Lily started therapy, and though her smile was smaller now, it was real. She even enrolled in night classes, trying to rebuild the pieces of her life one at a time. I told myself we were healing. But one morning, I went to check the mail and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed quote sometimes, "The ones you lock away are the ones holding the key." My fingers went cold. There was no signature, no clue, but I didn't need one. I knew that kind of mind game. Daniel was still trying to reach us, using whatever little power he had left. I tore the letter apart and threw it away, telling myself it was over. But a few days later, another arrived, this time with a photograph of me standing in my yard, taken from a distance. My heart stopped. The prison was 3 hours away. Someone was helping him. I reported it to the police, but they said inmates send letters all the time, that I should just ignore them. Ignore them? How do you ignore a ghost that refuses to stay buried? That night, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off, staring at the window, waiting for the next move. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Daniel's revenge wasn't physical anymore, it was psychological. He wanted to make me paranoid, to make me lose sleep, to let fear do what his hands no longer could. He didn't need freedom to destroy me. He only needed access. And somewhere, someone was giving it to him. I began tracing every letter, every envelope, every postmark. They came from different cities, never the same twice. That meant he had help. Maybe one of the women he'd fooled before, maybe someone who still believed his lies. My lawyer suggested I change addresses, start fresh, but I refused. Running meant giving him power. Instead, I decided to play his own game. I started replying to his letters, not to feed his ego, but to twist it. Each one was carefully written, calm, almost friendly, the kind of tone that would make him think he was still in control. I thanked him for reminding me how strong I was, told him his words no longer scared me, that I was finally living free of him. Every sentence was bait, every word designed to sting. I mailed them from different towns using different names so he would never know which ones were real. Soon, the letters from him changed. They became angrier, more desperate, his confidence cracking through the ink. He accused me of ruining his life, said I had turned Lily against him, that I'd stolen his chance at redemption. Reading his fury gave me a strange kind of peace. For the first time, he was the one losing control. But I didn't stop there. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness he had forced on us. I gathered every piece of evidence I had left, the recordings, the photographs, even old text screenshots, and sent anonymous copies to every woman he had ever conned. It wasn't hard to find them. Their names were buried in old emails, receipts, and online posts. One by one, they began speaking out. Within weeks, stories about Daniel's manipulation started circulating online. Journalists called him the digital predator, and his name became poison. Inmates started mocking him. Guards began treating him differently. I knew because the tone of his next letter was pure rage. He said he'd make me pay when he got out. But what he didn't realize was that I was already years ahead of him. I had contacted a victims advocacy group that specialized in financial and emotional abuse. They took his case public, turning his past into a cautionary story. Every time someone searched his name, they'd see headlines about deceit, fraud, and betrayal. I didn't just expose him. I erased his reputation piece by piece. Yet even with all that, I couldn't shake the unease that lingered. Late one night, as I sat by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold, I saw a car parked across the street with its lights off. It didn't move for hours. My hands trembled as I dialed the police, but when they arrived, the car was gone. I didn't know if it was real or just fear taking shape in the dark. Lily told me to stop letting him control my thoughts, but she didn't understand that he lived in the corners of our silence. He was like smoke gone, but never really gone. The next morning, another letter arrived, this one different. It was shorter, handwritten instead of typed. It said only 3 words, "You taught me." My knees weakened. I didn't know if it was a threat or a confession, but either way, I realized I had become something he never expected, a mirror of his own tactics. I had learned how to manipulate fear, how to turn control into defense. And maybe that was my punishment. Revenge had changed me. It had given me power, but it had also taken something I could never get back. Still, when I looked at Lily laughing again in the sunlight, I knew I'd do it all over if it meant she could finally breathe. It started with whispers. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the way small towns twist stories until they sound like confessions. I'd go to the grocery store and feel eyes on me, hear fragments of sentences cut off when I passed by. One morning, my neighbor Mrs. Kent, who used to bring us cookies every weekend, crossed the street instead of saying hello. That's when I knew something was wrong. Then came the message, an email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "Truth about you." Inside were screenshots of my private letters to Daniel, the ones I had written as part of my revenge plan. Someone had leaked them. My stomach turned cold as I read my own words, twisted and rearranged to make me look like I was still in love with him, that I had framed an innocent man. I could almost hear his voice laughing in the dark. He was still finding ways to pull my strings, even from behind bars. Within a week, my phone started ringing nonstop. Reporters, bloggers, even old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, all asking if I had really been the one manipulating him. I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smirk, that calm confidence he wore when he thought he was winning. He'd always said people were easy to convince if you gave them just enough truth wrapped in lies. Now he was proving it again. Somehow he had people on the outside helping him, former clients, women he had fooled, even a few who still believed in his charm. They were running online pages claiming Daniel was a victim of a vindictive ex-wife. My photos, my name, my words, everything was being dragged into their twisted narrative. I tried to ignore it, but the hate messages started showing up under my daughter's posts. Lily was furious, saying we should sue them all. But I told her no. Daniel wanted me to react. He wanted chaos. If I stayed calm, maybe I could turn this against him. So I played the same game again, but this time smarter. I reached out to a journalist named Claire, one who had once covered Daniel's trial and believed the victims. I told her everything, the letters, the leaks, the fear that he was orchestrating a smear campaign from prison. She listened quietly, recording every detail, her pen scratching across the paper like she was carving the truth out of a lie. When the article came out a week later, it was like a mirror shattering. "The manipulator still manipulates," it read. It exposed Daniel's prison contacts, the fake social accounts, even the emails sent under aliases traced back to the same location as his lawyer's assistant. The internet turned again, this time with fury aimed at him. But victory didn't feel sweet. It felt hollow because deep down, I knew what was coming next. Daniel was never the type to stay quiet after losing control. I thought the storm had peaked, but Daniel was just catching his breath. 2 weeks after the article was published, a video surfaced online. It showed a woman's voice, trembling, claiming she had seen me with Daniel just months before his arrest. She said I had promised him money, that I had set him up when he refused to give me more. The video spread like wildfire. My phone exploded with messages, most of them cruel, some threatening. Even people who once believed me began to hesitate, their faith cracking under the pressure of another version of the truth. I didn't know who the woman was, but her story sounded rehearsed, fed line by someone who knew how to twist emotions. I didn't have to guess who that was. Daniel had found a way to use his connections again, turning strangers into soldiers. One night, I received a letter from him, no return address, just my name written in that same sharp handwriting that used to sign birthday cards and apology notes. Inside was a single photograph of me and Lily at a local cafe, taken just days earlier. My heart stopped. He was watching. Somehow, from behind those walls, he had eyes on me. I felt exposed, hunted. Every sound in the house became a threat, every flicker of light a warning. I installed cameras, changed locks, even stayed with a friend for a while, but fear followed me like a shadow. Then, one morning, a letter arrived addressed to Lily. I almost threw it away, but something in me said to read it first. It was from Daniel. He wrote as if he were the victim, telling her that her mother had lied about everything, that I had ruined his life out of jealousy and spite. He said he still loved her, that he forgave her for abandoning him. I watched Lily's face as she read it. The confusion, the anger, the pain, it all flashed at once. She tore the letter apart, but the damage was already done. He had found a way back into our home without ever stepping outside those bars. That night, I sat by the window again, looking out at the same streetlights that once gave me comfort. The silence was heavy. I realized revenge wasn't a single act, it was a cycle, a storm that kept circling back. I had wanted justice, but Daniel wanted destruction, and he was willing to burn the world to get it. Still, I couldn't let him win. I started collecting everything: emails, posts, messages, videos, and built a case that connected all the pieces back to him. With Claire's help, we traced several of the fake accounts to devices used by visitors in the prison. It was enough to reopen an internal investigation. Weeks later, word came that Daniel had been moved to solitary confinement for violating communication restrictions. When I heard that, I didn't feel joy, only silence. He had been silenced, but so had a part of me. I realized I had been living inside his story for too long. It was time to write my own. The day I learned Daniel had filed an appeal, the sky was gray and heavy, the kind of weather that makes everything feel like a waiting room. I sat in the courthouse hallway, the same one I had walked years ago when I thought justice would set me free. Now I knew better. Justice wasn't freedom, it was a mirror reflecting the pieces of ourselves we didn't want to see. Daniel wasn't appealing to get out early. He was appealing to make noise, to drag my name back through the dirt, to make me relive it all. His lawyers claimed I had manipulated witnesses, that I had orchestrated his downfall out of revenge. They wanted to reopen the wounds I had tried so hard to close. As the hearing began, I felt every eye on me. I kept my hands folded, my voice steady, even as Daniel looked across the room with that same calm smile he used to wear when he thought he was untouchable. He didn't speak directly, but every word from his attorney carried his tone, mocking, familiar, rehearsed. The judge asked questions, the prosecutor countered, and somewhere in the noise I felt the weight of years pressing against my chest. Then it happened. The lawyer presented a recording, one of my old phone calls to Daniel, where I had pretended to sympathize with him as part of my plan. But edited, it sounded different. It sounded like love. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. For a second, I thought the ground would open beneath me. My daughter sat behind me, silent, frozen. I could feel her confusion pressing against my back. In that moment, I realized Daniel had won something, not the case, but the story. He had twisted it one last time. That night, I didn't sleep. I wandered through the house, touching the walls, the photos, the memories I had built trying to bury him. Everything felt hollow. I had spent so long fighting his shadow that I no longer knew who I was without it. When the verdict came weeks later, his appeal was denied. Daniel would stay behind bars. The news should have felt like victory, but it didn't. I sat in my car outside the courthouse and stared at my reflection in the window. I didn't see relief, I saw exhaustion. He was gone, yet somehow still inside me, stitched into every choice I had made since the day he walked into our lives. Revenge had become a language I couldn't unlearn. Weeks passed after the verdict, but peace didn't come. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears until it feels like a voice. Lily visited less often now. I couldn't blame her. She had her own life to rebuild, one that wasn't haunted by the echoes of her father's mistakes. I would watch her drive away from the porch, her taillights fading into the dusk, and I'd whisper prayers she'd never have to carry what I did. Some nights I'd find myself scrolling through old news articles, seeing Daniel's name reduced to a headline, a case file, a statistic. The world had moved on, but I was still here, living in the aftermath. I started therapy, something I'd once thought was for people weaker than me. But the first time I sat in that chair and said his name out loud without anger, I realized healing isn't weakness, it's surrender. My therapist asked me what I wanted now that the fight was over. I didn't know how to answer. For so long, revenge had been my compass, my reason to wake up, my proof that I still mattered. Without it, I felt weightless, untethered. One evening, I drove to the lake near our old house. The air was still, the water dark and glassy. I brought with me the last letter Daniel had ever sent, the one I had never opened. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single page, written in his neat, cold handwriting. "You win," it said, "but now you're just like me." I stared at those words until they blurred. He was wrong. I hadn't become him. I had become someone who had survived him. That was different. I folded the letter and set it on the water, watching it drift until it sank. The ripples faded, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel his presence behind me. The next morning, I started packing. I sold the house, the furniture, even the curtains he once picked out. I kept only one photograph, Lily as a little girl, smiling on her birthday, her eyes bright and untouched by the world's cruelty. I moved to a smaller town near the coast, where no one knew my name. Sometimes, when people ask about my past, I just say I lost someone once, but I found myself in the process. It's easier that way. The truth is too heavy to carry everywhere. There are days when the memories return, soft and uninvited, but they no longer hurt. They just remind me of what it took to finally be free. Revenge didn't heal me, but it cleared the path for something that could. And that, I've learned, is the difference between justice and peace. Justice ends the story. Peace lets you live after it. People think revenge is a fire that burns once and fades, but it isn't. It's slow, patient, like smoke that seeps into the walls of your life. It lingers long after the flames are gone. For years, I believed that if I could just make Daniel pay, if I could expose every lie, every betrayal, I would finally be free. But freedom doesn't come from someone else's downfall. It comes from your own forgiveness, not of them, but of yourself. I used to wake up every morning thinking of what he did, how he broke our family, how he turned love into a weapon. But I see now that holding on to that hate was just another way of keeping him alive. I had built a cage for him, but I was the one who stayed inside it. When I look back, I don't regret fighting for justice. I regret letting vengeance become my identity. It started as protection for Lily, for myself, but somewhere along the way, it became obsession. I measured my peace in his misery, my healing in his suffering. And when it was finally over, when his name stopped echoing through the news, I realized the silence wasn't victory, it was emptiness. That's the part no one tells you. Winning doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it just feels like being left alone with the ashes. But life goes on, even after the fire. Lily laughs again now, that full-hearted kind of laugh that reminds me of who we were before all of this. She doesn't talk about her father anymore, and I don't ask. Some doors are better left closed. I've learned to find beauty in the smallest things, the sound of rain on the porch, the smell of coffee in the morning, the softness of peace when it finally settles in. I still visit the lake sometimes, the one where I let his last letter drift away. I sit by the water and think about how much power I once gave to someone who didn't deserve it. But then I think about how far I've come, how much strength it takes to survive a love that tried to destroy you. People say time heals, but that's not true. Time only gives you space to choose what to do with the pain. I chose to turn mine into strength. I chose to live. I don't know if Daniel ever thinks of me anymore, and it doesn't matter. He's part of a story that ended long ago, a chapter I no longer read. What matters now is that I'm finally writing new ones, quiet ones, honest ones, free ones. So, if there's anything I've learned, it's this: revenge may satisfy the heart for a moment, but forgiveness, real forgiveness, even if it's silent, is what frees the soul forever. Because in the end, revenge ends a story. Forgiveness lets you begin a new one. And after everything, I think I finally know which one I want to live in.